Hey guys, SBM Beamer here today with a tier list video for the Uma Musume expansion. We are just 1 week away from the World Championship for the English edition of Shadowverse Evolve. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to run you guys through the top 4 decks of the format and the tier list in general in preparation for the live stream next week. I'm also flying over to Japan. I'll be participating in the World Championship, so hopefully I'll be on stream and I'll bring back a good result. But without further ado, let's jump into the tier list. So you'll see that in tier 1, there are 4 main decks right now. Uma Musume, Leo Sword, Discard Dragon, and Midrange Forest. I would say that each of these 4 decks are definitely tier 1. They put up insane results to the last chance qualifiers. They are the main 4 decks you'll be expecting. And the World Championship will be no exception. So jumping into it, Uma Musume, so this deck was actually nerfed before it was released, but it is still extremely powerful. The main concept of this deck is they have a lot of removal, they have a lot of well-statted followers, and their intention is just to reach turn 5 or further, and then they can play the Daiwa Vodka combo for 5 mana, and then that allows them to play 1 removal spell, buff their entire board by +1/+1, and both of the followers are quite well-statted. And so essentially they can snowball from there. They're a tempo deck, and they can finish off with a Guru Cap, which is potentially a 10 damage Storm, and they can finish with Narita Brian as well. So Narita does 5 damage and it's pretty much unavoidable in the current meta. And that is Uma Musume in a nutshell, and you can see some of these decks here. So Dreamlife, he came second at the Singapore LCQ, and we have Torgal, he came second at his LCQ, and so on and so forth. So that's Uma Musume. Next up is Leo Sword. So one of my favorite decks. I'm a big Sword man. So Sword is one of those decks that didn't get many changes in the Uma expansion. They only added 2 new cards. So the first one is Tokai Teo. So Tokai Teo basically is a huge tempo tool. When it comes down, it basically kills one thing, because most of the time Sword is flooding the board and it gets stronger with more followers in the field, essentially. And furthermore, it can evolve, and when it evolves, it gains Storm, and it's got a +1/+1 effect. It's not really showing here, but yep, that's Storm. Cool. So the purpose of this deck is it's an aggressive mid-range deck. It has the ability to control the board early, and then it doesn't really let go until eventually it drops Leonidas, and Leo buffs everything that you play from there on onwards, and if they can't answer Leo's resolve, then they just sort of lose. Moving along, Discard Dragon. I would say this is definitely the most popular deck in Shadowverse Evolve right now. So the discard variant has taken control of the archetype for now, or the class for now, I would say. So they got 2 new cards, I believe. So look at a more standard list, so Kriko's list, I think, except for Super Krik actually. But the Guru Cap, once again, is a dragon card, so it can be played in this class, and it can do up to 10 storm damage by discarding 2 cards and feeding it 3 mana, essentially 3 carrots. And on top of that, it synergizes well with discard synergies. So Trail of Light, Dragon Song Flute, and Dracomancer's Rites. So there's combos where it can do 12 damage in a single turn, which is pretty insane. And then also the other card that you'll see a lot of is Riko Kashimoto. So 6 mana Rush, and when it attacks an enemy follower, it can destroy another follower and deal 3 damage to the enemy leader. So this card's really strong tempo play, burns the enemy leader, and combined with these 2 cards, and of course there's a few other tech cards, but we won't go into them because they're not often played. But with these 2 cards plus the existing discard package, it does a lot of unavoidable damage to the enemy leader. And you know, if they draw Dragon Oracle, it's going to be a pretty uphill battle for a lot of decks to deal with. So I will mention that it is a little bit of a triangle, I would say. So Uma Musume, sort of weak against Dragon. Leo Sword, sort of good against Dragon. So and then Uma, a lot of people consider it pretty good against Sword, but depending on who you ask, you know, the Sword mains will usually say that Sword is fine against Uma, but I think it's a pretty universal opinion that Sword beats Dragon, so you can consider it a bit of a rock, paper, scissors matchup. So that's part of the reason why you can kind of expect to see any of these 4 tier 1 decks in the meta right now. And the final deck is Midrange Forest. We did not forget about you. So this deck got a pretty major upgrade from the recent expansion. So first of all, it gained a 1 mana card called Shiroka Windy. So it's 2/1. And look, the effect isn't really why it's played, right? It's because it's a pretty decent 1-cost follower. It's got 2 attack. and it has synergies with like the rest of the cards in the pool. So, and also, I mean, you know, Forest doesn't really have that much draw outside of Harvest Festival, and you want to hit key combos with like your Ancient Elf. So, yeah, it's generally good combos with everything. It's a 1-mana card. The other card that they got, which is arguably the most important card, and I think it's still played in the Japanese version to this day, Marvelous Sunday. 2-mana card. When it bounces a card, you gain 2 defense to your leader, and I mean, healing is like, you know, extremely powerful in this game, given how much damage there is. Plus, it's got a great stat line. It's 2/3 follower. One of the best cards to come out of the Misname. And then also they got Asian Flash. So Asian Flash is sort of Rose Gardener, but instead of evolving, you feed it a carrot and you get a very similar effect. And it doesn't die to Surefire Bullet. Gold City gets played sometimes mainly as a 1-mana card. You need 4 mana, obviously, in order to play it, but after refunds 3 PP, it's effectively 1-mana card. And 1-mana 3/3 is very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with. They also added Silent Suzuka. Look, Forest got a lot of cards, right? So Silent Suzuka, a new Storm option, so does 4 damage by itself for only 4 mana, and when it evolves for 2 mana, it can bounce any card on the field, or any follow on the field, sorry, on top of the enemy leader's deck. So very strong tempo play, does 5 damage when evolved, and it sets you up to kill them with Silverbolt. So Silverbolt is a set 1 card, it's been played here and there, but now that you've got a more aggressive build, it's very easy to chunk them for maybe, you know, 10, 12, 13 damage, something like that, and then you Silverbolt and you do 7 to 9 damage, and GG. So that's pretty much how mid-range Forest works in this expansion. Rose Queen package is not used very frequently now. We did see one player qualify to Worlds in the California tournament using the Rose Queen package, but I think they're the only person who's done so with that particular build. So that's mid-range Forest. I would say that this deck has a pretty evenish matchup against most of the decks. I'd say slightly favored against Sword, if not favored, depends on the build. But yeah, these are basically your 4 tier 1 decks. Because of the way the matchup spread works, it makes sense that you can bring any of these 4 decks and expect decent results. So if you have a store championship and you want to win, I would definitely recommend one of these 4. Now, tier 2, there is only a single deck here, so I think this one is more of a sleeper pick. It's not played very often. However, it did manage to win a last chance qualifier. So this deck, it runs no new cards. It's literally the same as it was in set 2. Noting that in set 2, Aegis Haven was more popular, but the pure control build of Aegis Haven is a lot better against decks like Sword and Dragon, not Dragon, sorry. Uma Musume in particular, because it can run Themis' Decree. Now, I do believe that this deck has a slight weakness against decks like Dragon and Forest to an extent, but it depends on how the game plays out. But this deck is definitely a sleeper. If you enjoy playing Haven, it's probably the only build I would recommend right now. But yeah, essentially the whole point is you play Seraph on 6 if you can, and then once the Seraph pops, you heal for 10, you drop Aegis, you ward it, and you usually win from there. So yeah, still a strong deck, but not many people play it. It's pretty unpopular. That's why it's in tier 2. So next up are our tier 3 and tier 4 decks. Now I will note I'm not going to go through all of them, but in tier 3 we have Aggro Abyss and Aegis Haven. So we have an Aggro Abyss deck here. I believe this one is taken from Different Fight because there's no publicly available tournament deck lists that manage the top 4 at any of the major events. But I think you can get the general gist of what this deck aims to do and what type of decks it's good against. So essentially, it aims to curve out a very aggressive curve with very low-costed followers and very efficiently statted followers. And so the intention is just to hit the enemy face over and over and over again. You do tend to run out of cards with this deck, but it does so much damage to the enemy face that you'll usually kill them beforehand. And if you can't, then you just run out of cards and die. So it is what it is. So the main thing about this deck is that it has 2 very good matchups. So it's good against Swordcraft, and it is good against Dragoncraft. In exchange, it has a terrible matchup against Uma Musume because they have so much removal, have answers to everything, they out-tempo you. Basically, Uma is like a hard counter to this deck, and Uma is popular in tier 1. Also of note, this deck is not good against Forest. There's a single card in Forest which just, like, literally, like, wipes the floor with you, which is Elfchild May. If they have that card, it's so hard to build a board and you just sort of lose anyway. And plus, Forest got a lot faster and they're way more proactive in the early game, which means that you might, depending on your hand, not even be able to out-tempo them. So with 2 out of 4 of the decks basically being counters to this, Aggro Abyss can only be seen as a bit of a rogue pick, and potentially more of a tier 3 pick. It does have its place, but it's not great in this meta. And then just finishing off tier 3 is Aegis Haven. I think the main reason it's tier 3 is because it doesn't really have any tops, and also it's currently inferior to Aegis Haven, which just has a better matchup into the current meta. We don't have deck lists for the rest of the tier 3 and tier 4 because none of them have actually topped any major events, and in the first place, they're pretty similar to how they were in set 2. So if you want to play them, you can, but it would be on more of a casual or like, local level where you know where your meta is and you might be able to avoid some of the worst matchups, right? So Aegis Haven, I'm not going to go through it. I have a deck profile on my YouTube channel, which you can check out. It'll pretty much be exactly the same as that, I would say. Now, as for the tier 4 decks, so originally we didn't even have a tier 4, but I thought, let's just highlight the fact that Rune is probably the worst deck in the format right now. Unfortunately, Rune is just too slow against pretty much every deck. They're either more proactive, have answers to what Rune can do, and the worst part is basically that Uma Musume is just basically a better version of Rune. It does very similar things, and like there's basically no point in playing these unless you just really like playing Rune right now. But they will get better in future sets, so that is a copium that you can take. So that is it for the tier list. This is my current opinion of what the top decks in the meta are and where the rogue decks kind of rank at the moment. I am aware that there's a bunch of meme decks that aren't on the tier list at all. It's not intended to cover everything. And it's always possible that someone will be cooking very heavily in preparation for the World Championship, and they might find a deck or perfect a deck that no one else has seen yet, and they would ride that all the way to a top 2, top 1 finish at the World Championship, right? But until that happens, I mean, there's no way we can know, and that's part of the excitement. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. We'll have plenty more content in the future, including tier lists and deck profiles. I'll do my best to the World Championship, and I'll see you guys next time.